morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Great Hall of the University of Sydney. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Eora Nation and extend that respect to other Aboriginals present. My name's Lloyd. I'm the Speaking Competitions Officer for the New South Wales Department of Education, and you're about to see the 2016 final of the Premier's Debating Challenge for Years 11 and 12 for the Hume Barbour Trophy. This particular competition is the oldest of its kind in New South Wales. It began in 1930 when someone by the name of Miss Hume Barbour, a descendant of Hume the Explorer, donated this splendid trophy, which represents the Greek orator Demosthenes in full flight. It was created by the sculptor Rainer Hoff, who was also responsible for the Archibald Fountain in Hyde Park, amongst other famous works. Initially, in the bad old days, only boys' schools were able to enter this competition, but over the years it's extended to include all schools from all regions in the state. In 2005, this competition, along with all the age divisions, became merged as part of the Premier's Debating Challenge. One of the supporters of this competition is the English Speaking Union, and I welcome Professor David Flint, AM, President of the New South Wales branch of the ESU, an international body that provides support to young people engaged in educational activities that require high-level communication skills. The education faculty in the University of Sydney has provided the venue for the final for many years. Initially, as some people discovered today, it was in the education building, but now in this most glorious of venues, the Great Hall. A number of representatives from the university are present, including Associate Professor Michael Anderson from the Faculty of Education and Social Work. I'd also like to make a special acknowledgement to Lily Murray from the Royal Overseas League, who's generously provided lunch for the finalists and their guests. Representatives from the Department of Education who are present include Ms Rosemary Davis, Arts, Sports and Initiatives Director, Ms Andrea Connell, Principal of Sydney Girls High, and Mr Tony Rudd, Principal of Northern Beaches Secondary College, Manly Campus. In the auditorium today, we have students from the following schools: Hurlstone Agricultural High, St Mary Star of the Sea, Blakehurst High, Sefton High, Gymea High, Camaragal High, Georges River Peakhurst, The Hills Sports, Katoomba, Kellyville, East Hills Girls, Sydney Boys, Nepean Creative and Performing Arts, and Lumia. They are joined by students in 20 different locations who are watching the debate due to a program called Dart Connections. There are over 400 of them who will be logging on, if they haven't, well, let's hope they've already done so, from the following schools: Ardlethan Central, Denison College Bathurst, Canobolas, Cootamundra, Aurora College, Mona Vale Primary, Concord West Primary, Denison College, Guyra Central, Macquarie Fields, Merriweather, Orange, Sarah Redfern, Smiths Hill, Tormina, Vincentia, Wollaware, Windsor South Primary, Scarborough Primary and Queanbeyan East. Now, this particular competition is open to senior students in government schools across the state. It takes the form of a 1-hour preparation debate with both sides having a choice of 3 topics. Initially, all teams are grouped into zones of 4, 5 or 6 for the round robin level, and after that has been completed, we enter the knockout phase. On the back of your program, you'll see listed the names of the schools that were successful at the zone level, and this represents a fraction of the over 160 school teams that were involved in this year's competition. Now, after those zone and regional levels, quarterfinals were held at the Arts Unit in Lewisham, at Homebush Boys, John Edmondson High, Asquith Girls, and then there were semi-finals at Newtown and at Ryde. Our 2 finalists today are Sydney Girls High, who've won the competition on 2 occasions, and Northern Beaches Manly Campus, who have yet to win this particular age division, but have won some of the other age divisions. Our chairperson is Associate Professor Michael Anderson from the Faculty of Education and Social Work. Our timekeeper is Kate Jackson, the Premier's Spelling Bee Support Officer and a former Combined High Schools debater. I'll now hand over to Michael and Kate to conduct the final.
Thank you, Lloyd, and welcome to the Great Hall at the University of Sydney. It's wonderful to have so many people joining us here today, both virtually and in person. I've been told by Lloyd not to improvise, so as an old drama teacher, I'll try not to. Welcome to the state final of the Premier's Debating Challenge for years 11 and 12 for the Hume Barbour Trophy. This debate is between Northern Beaches Secondary College, Manly Campus and Sydney Girls High. The affirmative team from Manly Campus is Elesi Kougioumtzis, Taylor Rowe, Maddy Bosler and Tom Butler. The negative team from Sydney Girls is Mouli Ghosh, Sophie Jaggar, Eden Blair, Bronwyn Kirk. The adjudicators are Bronwyn Cowell, Eleanor Gordon-Smith and Angud Chawla. Bronwyn Cowell has been a World University Debating Championship Grand Finalist and Top 5 speaker and an Australasian Women's Debating Championship 3-time Grand Finalist, as well as being finals judge at those events. She coached the New South Wales State Schools team in 2012 and 2013, with the team being runner-up in 2012 and champions in 2013. She was a member of a Sydney Girls High team that won this competition, and she is currently studying French and government at the University of Sydney. Eleanor Gordon-Smith teaches philosophy and ethics at the University of Sydney. She's written for The Australian, The Sydney Morning Herald, Junkie, Meanjin, The Drum, and has produced radio for Triple M and Radio National's The Philosopher's Zone. She's a previous national winner of the Plain English Speaking Award and has ranked in the top 5 speakers at the Australasian Women's Debating Tournament, the Australasian InterVarsity Championship and the World Schools Debating Championships, and was Best Novice Speaker at the Australasian Debating Championships. Angud Chawla attended Sydney Boys High School and was a member of the team that won this competition. He's been a World's Grand Finalist and Top 5 speaker, an Australasian Debating Champion, and where he was judged second best speaker. He is currently completing a combined arts and commerce degree at the University of Sydney. Each speaker may speak for 8 minutes. There will be a warning bell at 8 minutes with 2 bells at 6 minutes to indicate that a speaker's time has expired. A bell will be rung continuously if a speaker exceeds the maximum time by more than 1 minute. The topic for this debate is that we should ban social media from allowing extremist comments. The first affirmative speaker, Elesi, will begin the debate.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we are looking at a social media platform that has a reach of billions of users. This platform has the capacity and has proven this time and time again to be a facilitator for hate speech and terrorist visibility. We believe the current system implemented on Facebook is not actively removing the harms perpetuated by individuals and groups who engage with this unacceptable behaviour. And so, ladies and gentlemen, we will never stand for negative discourse to be permitted around these notions. Today, I will be talking about why Facebook in particular should be regulated, why discourse generated through Facebook about these issues is always negative, and how this actually affects terrorist groups. Our second speaker today will be discussing how this changes the calculus of individuals making inflammatory comments and how it changes discourse in general. Today we propose a filter system added to Facebook's current community guidelines. Under this system, Facebook will implement a technological coding algorithm that effectively filters words and phrases that aim to perpetuate extremist hate speech and extremist terrorist speech. We think that Facebook has the capacity to implement such a system, and under this progressive change, principally we support the idea of implementing similar systems in other social media sites, for example, Twitter or Tumblr in the future. For the time being, we will be cooperating with Facebook, a company outspokenly committed to limiting harmful discourse on its facility, and thus will be willing to participate with these changes. We think that Facebook's popularity, reach, and type of platform reasons it as a rational source for implementation of this model to proactively suppress extremist hate and terrorist speech. It will work in a 3-phase system whereby if someone posts or attempts to comment a particular phrase that is deemed not reasonable by the filter system, they will get 2 warnings, and on the 3rd time their account will be suspended. So now to this idea of why Facebook in particular should be regulated. So first of all, we need to look at Facebook itself. We are talking about a public platform of uninformed individuals. With a reach of over 1 billion users. On this forum, people have the capacity to post comments of hate and terrorist speech, relying on others to report a comment if it is considered offensive to one of them. And then they need to wait for the Facebook site to moderate this comment and decide on the appropriate action, that is, to block the comment, delete their account, or leave it if they do not deem it unacceptable. To the volume of the site, we think this system is not effective enough because of the size of the user base. When the comments are filtered before they are posted, it makes it a lot more efficient to eliminate the public access of a terrorist or hate-filled comment. So what does this ineffective reporting system look like? You know, we've got this one example of a recent video of a male adding chili to a female tampon and filming the woman using it and her agony afterwards. This particular video was reported multiple times, but because of the inefficiency of the reporting system, the current reporting system to remove hateful extremist content on its site, it remained up. Further, non-social media platforms that desire to engage in the discourse surrounding hate speech and terrorist extremist comments are much more effectively addressed is a much more effective way to address this sort of discourse on a regulated platform, for example, televised media, whereby there are checks and balances that enforce accountability on reporters or personality who broadcast hate speech or extremist comments. For example, we've got Sonia Kruger, who blatantly encouraged extremist racism on the guise of terrorist fear, but was quickly forced to retract her comments due to the accountability enabled through televised media platforms. This accountability is not available currently online on Facebook. Therefore, comments similar to hers and those of terrorist groups are enabled to freely post comments and propaganda supporting their negative views. Essentially, we're looking at a platform that enables terrorist organisations to create accounts and spread terrorist propaganda, and to this same idea allows bigoted racists to post harmful comments generalising the Muslim population in a negative way. Neither of these situations is permissible by the affirmative team, and we stand by the proposed model to mitigate to a great extent the presence and discourse surrounding these situations and extremist comments. So to this second idea of why discourse generated through Facebook is always harmful. Ladies and gentlemen, by their nature, the very types of comments addressed are the very comments which serve to inflict only harm. Comments, I hate X, let's behead all X, time for a genocide of X, serve exclusively to contribute hate, negativity and discrimination to an online forum. Now, the negative team are going to tell you these comments or posts do have a positive implication due to the creation of public, rational online discourse which condemns racist or terrorist speech. This is wrong for 3 reasons. Firstly, it relies on the assumption that discourse is rational. As we've discussed, Facebook is an unregulated media forum by which all individuals have the capacity to comment or reply, regardless of how informed or uninformed they are. In fact, Facebook comments are more likely to be short, misspelled, profanity-strewn and generally inarticulate rather than eloquent, essay structure, rational replies. And any additional well-explained comment is less likely to be read in its entirety, liked, or indeed supported simply because most Facebook users don't bother to press the read below sign and instead follow the funny, crass and often offensive comments. So in fact, discourse is more likely to be irrational and indeed more hate-ridden, either in support of or rejection of the original extremist comment. Secondly, the assumption this point relies upon is that there will be condemnation of the original comments. Individuals on Facebook have no accountability, and therefore condemnation, even if it occurs, is unlikely to deter their future extremist comments, and are indeed likely to spur more aggression and anger. However, the capacity of condemnation relies upon the assumption that a commentator's friends and followers, those most likely to view Facebook posts on a newsfeed, are more likely to condemn their friends than support it. And ladies and gentlemen, we think this is fundamentally just not a likely situation to happen. And finally, even if a significant amount of rational discourse was generated on an extremist post, which condemned them, publicly, this will never mitigate the harm to the minority individuals or groups who have been the focus of a harmful discussion. When a minority reads, sees, and even contributes to discussion, they are personally victimised and oppressed by what they read. But more importantly, the creation of discourse within schools, communities, or online legitimises the discussion of degradation of these minority individuals. ISIS posts a comment on Facebook, and the next day, a girl at school is called a terrorist nappyhead. Someone comments about the relative failings of the Indigenous community, and the next day on the bus, two non-Indigenous individuals have a discussion comparing the benefits and harms of indigeneity. Discourse, no matter how rational or condemnatory, rationalises and legitimises more discourse of hate, discussing hate, comparing hate, and of a minority community with less avenues to respond by the very nature of being a minority. Every comment on Facebook, no matter the response, will always harm the minority who reads it, the minority who hears about it the next day, and the minority who gets called a name because of it. Now, lastly, to this idea of how it affects the terrorist groups, it's important to recognise the calculus of a terrorist group, especially on Facebook. Terrorist groups and ideologies actively aim to instill terror and fear into the minds of receivers. Through Facebook, these groups are enabled to post groups and pages encouraging the spread of their propaganda and their intent to recruit people. Why? Under the guise of free speech. We do not stand for the use of Facebook for these reasons. It's important to note the majority of overseas ISIS recruits have been conducted through the website of Facebook. This is indicative of the use of this platform and current inability to incapacitate the speech and ideology of terrorist organisations online. Now, even if they, turn to messages which won't be, filtered like the comment system is, ladies and gentlemen, terrorist organisations' reach and impact will always be undermined when their propaganda, comments, and thus presence is refuted from their actual online platform. Ladies and gentlemen, this model will always limit the further reach and presence of terrorist groups, recruiters, and sympathisers by removing their negative presence and discourse from the Facebook and publicism of platform. And for these reasons, we are proud to propose.
I'd now like to call on the first negative speaker, Mouli, who will begin their case.
The position of the opposition says commenting or talking about controversial issues, no matter whether it's rational, promotes hate. This made me wonder why we allow any comments at all. The reality is that on Facebook, it is on Facebook that individuals can best express themselves in the most rational way possible that is the least inflammatory. So I will be integrating most of my rebuttal into my substantive, but I want to first deal with this issue of terrorism. The opposition talked about how terrorism is best proliferated on Facebook because it is the way that ISIS has been able to recruit members, etc. We have a few responses. Firstly, the fact that the government has been able to prevent terror attacks in Australia is because they've been alerted to those types of activity on Facebook. Facebook has given the government resources to actually find out these groups and see whether these people, certain people, seem to have suspicions of going to terrorist groups and whatnot. So it's just simply not true to say that this was just a way of Facebook was just at any means of like proliferating terrorism, because we also saw that it was a way of actively stopping this kind of terrorism to get to be like taken out in real life, which is why these attacks have been able to be prevented. So, moving on to my substantive. Firstly, I'll be talking about why we shouldn't arbitrarily curtail people's freedom of speech on Facebook, and secondly, why an open forum of ideas is best regulates extremism. So firstly, on my first point, this is incredibly important and necessary speech, and this is for three main reasons. Firstly, it allows people the ability to express their identity. The opposition's model just simply bans you from doing that. And because it works off an arbitrary system of just looking at keywords and key expressions. So what does this look like? It means that people who want to represent themselves on Facebook, who want to, talk about their affiliation to a particular political party, or say that their religion is the best, which is inherently maybe extremist opinions, those are the types of people who would also have their comments suppressed, and they feel like their identity is not being able to be expressed. However, it's also the types of people who say like, I hate men, or I hate white people, things that are not inherently bad, and things that have a particular context, but these are not the types of things that get discriminated, because Facebook was never going to be able to discriminate in a nuanced way. Secondly, it is because there are important views that don't meet the requirement of banning. These are like views that don't incite violence in any way. They just want to have a discussion about these things, that Facebook gives them the most rational way of doing so. Moreover, this is the type of things that government has deemed necessary for democracy, because people should be able to express their right to, their opposition to certain things. Thirdly, we think that this type of discussion might be unable to be had elsewhere. We think that when people respond to comments on Facebook or make certain posts, if this got banned or suppressed, they might not be able to do this elsewhere, because they might not be able to know the people they were going to talk to. They wouldn't be able to find out people in public to have these types of discussions with. So Facebook allows that type of discourse to actually generate. Moreover, we think that other forums might be unsafe. The opposition really wanted to talk about how maybe they'd be happy to extend this to Tumblr and Twitter and whatnot. We think that ultimately, if people had these extremist opinions, they would try to have breeding grounds for their extremism elsewhere. They would try and create forums and create mechanisms so they would be able to have this discussion where their biases are only confirmed and never able to be challenged, which is an essential factor that Facebook allows you to do. It will be taken and they will be expressed in a much more inflammatory way. So, at the end of this, we think that this speech is essential to people, and this policy functions for their ability to properly express it. Secondly, under this point, we think that the application of this algorithm is unjust, and this is for three main reasons. We think that firstly, the metrics are random, because the opposition told us that they were looking at keywords. This means they don't discriminate on context, and they don't discriminate on the audience it is being targeted towards. So, secondly, it means that they target equally all people, no matter on the type of justification that they have. So we think that it was incredibly important for minorities to be able to say that they don't like white people, or they don't have they really hate men or whatever, because those things are not inherently harming those people's privilege. It is just an outlet for their anger and their suppressed and their oppression. We think that if this model goes through, what will happen is people who are homophobic and say, I don't support gay marriage, will be banned, but also the gay people who just don't support marriage as an institution and say, I hate gay marriage, will also be banned. There is a distinct difference in the context of these two situations, and what this means is it creates a chilling effect on the whole thing. It means that those comments that need to be said to have that type of discourse will never be able to be had, because context will never be taken into account. Thirdly, we think that it targets the language used by the least privileged. So when we look at things like keywords and key ideas and stuff like that, it means that people can just keep on expressing those extremist opinions, but they'll just use cushy words. They'll just make it in the most long-form article as possible. But that doesn't mean that opinion is less extremist. It's just expressed in a better way. But the ideas are just as harmful. We think that extremist opinions are allowed to be proliferated by the most privileged. It favours those right-wing conservative people who are able to eloquently express their idea, no matter how bigoted it might actually be. And that was always going to be harmful because there's probably minorities who wanted to just have an expression of anger, an expression of passion, and they would never be able to do that. So we think that no matter the impact on extremist thoughts, Facebook should not do this because it is unjust to stop people from saying what they want and to discriminate people and to say who gets to actually say it. Moving on to my second point, why an open forum ideas best regulates extremism. So firstly, we think that the marketplace of ideas is functioning, and this is for four main reasons. We think that it allows people to actually call this out. It means that people have a right of reply, and they can write responses, and they can write comments and responses to this. It means that the majority of people we think are quite good and are quite able to manipulate Facebook in a good way, and we think that they are able to actually say, argue back effectively against this or not. Secondly, we think that people's ideas are fairly judged. We think that when people have things like an angry reaction or likes determine the amount of the popularity of the post, it means that negative posts are often undermined because people don't support them as much. Moreover, thirdly, we think that it's an opt-in system. We think that people can choose to have Facebook. They can choose the friends that they like. They can choose the pages that they go into. They can choose to create safe spaces within groups. So for example, if you wanted to follow a lot of feminist blogs, you could go that, and you could rest assured that the other people who are following that are also probably feminists, and you can have nuanced discussion. That is a safe space for you. That exists within the broader spectrum of Facebook, and that is something that we were always happy to support. Lastly, we also think that this means that airtime is not dependent on how much money you have. We saw that actually in contrary to what the opposition said, minorities actually utilize Facebook to the best means because in the media, they wouldn't have the best voice because they don't have the money to support their views. Whereas on Facebook, they are actually being able to express those ideas and we think that the internet actually provides the greatest equalizer of those opinions. Moving quickly on to the second part of this point, which is that it creates an echo chamber or backlash. We think that the outrage that will arise from this will mean that people who are the most privileged and who have these extremist opinions will be like, oh, the world is too PC, everyone is against me, I am the underdog. That was really, really harmful because it only means that their extremist ideas get strengthened. It does not decline extremism. It only allows them to take that elsewhere and make it proliferate in a worse platform. So when the opposition wanted to told you that condemnation was going to deter this, that was never going to happen, and we were always happy to stand by that. Thank you.
The second affirmative speaker, Taylor, will continue their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, I believe in the genocide of all Kurdish Christians. Under the opposition's understanding of expression, this means that my right to make this comment overrides the Kurdish Christians' right to not be threatened with hatred on social media, because my uninformed opinions are a part of my identity, compared to the minority identity of a persecuted and oppressed group. Today, the main issues that we have with the opposition's case are firstly their misunderstanding of our model, and secondly their misunderstanding of how Facebook works as a social media website. So they had three problems with our model, which were that it doesn't let security people cooperate with Facebook to find people who are acting with terrorist groups, that it suppresses the identity of minority groups, and that it also it eliminates all discourse, particularly by minorities. So firstly, to their idea of how it eliminates the ability for mitigation of security threats. The functioning of this collaboration would not stop under our model. We encourage this. Under our model, the people being flagged for their phrases and comments can still be passed on to the government. Which pages someone likes can still be passed on to a government. This enabling the safety of Facebook and in real life. Secondly, there are other forums through which the government finds people who are making inflammatory comments and flags them as potential terrorists. And thirdly, we think that because this reduces the long-term capacity for people to be radicalised, it actually minimises the need for this in the first place. Secondly, onto their idea of the suppression of individuals' identity. So we think it's never okay to claim your identity as a racist bigot. We think it's never okay to use your guise of an identity to spread hate. And we think that the idea of being flagged as an unacceptable comment perpetuates discourse around one's own understandings of your negative views. So we think that if your identity is one which doesn't fit within the guidelines, and it's probably not your identity, it's probably just you being racist or sexist or in some way prejudiced toward the group. Their main issue, though, was how this eliminates all discourse. So they seem to think that under our model there would be no more comments on Facebook, there'd be no more discourse around any of the controversial issues in our society. So we'd just like to quickly go over how our model's going to work. So that being that specific phrases and words will be eliminated. So this means that things like "I hate all white people," as I said, would be taken down, because we think that someone going up and saying "I hate all white people" as a way of expressing their frustration with a systemic problem is not going to create legitimate discourse and not going to get white people to go, "Oh, you're right, I hate me too." It's probably not going to be helpful at all. What is helpful is someone maybe posting, "White people have been systemically oppressing me. I don't like how X works as a system because it means that me as a minority, or I as a minority am oppressed." And this is not stuff that is going to be taken down under our model, but things like "I hate white people" would be, because we think that no kind of expressing hatred in that way is ever going to be helpful, and it's never going to do anything but harm the person that it is directed towards. Also, just quickly on their issue of that some things aren't going to be caught by the filtering system. One of the benefits of this filtering system is that when the majority of unacceptable comments are taken away, it means the reporting system actually becomes more effective, because the reason that it is currently ineffective is because there are so many comments that Facebook simply can't sort through them all. But once you eliminate the majority, the ones that are kind of borderline, which are maybe not explicitly racist, can still be reported, and Facebook now has a broader capacity to deal with those. So on to their assertion of how Facebook is the most rational and logical place for discourse. So firstly, my first speaker spent quite some time on explaining to us why Facebook isn't really a good place to have a discussion. This is because of things like when people actually do go into their reasons, when they try to have a rational discussion, it'll often be quite long. People don't read more than the first 2 lines, so the only things that do get read are the short comments like "ha ha ha, go die, feminazi," or things like that. And we don't think that this is ever going to be helpful, but we think what is the only comments which could be helpful are the ones which A, wouldn't be taken down, and B, no one really is able to read because of this slew of racist or sexist or derogatory comments. So we think that through the forum of Facebook, because it is generally someone's Facebook friends, people who they connect with because they have similar perspectives, who are going to be seeing their Facebook posts, what they're saying is probably more likely to be supported than condemned. And so while my first speaker came up and said quite a bit about how this is why Facebook is never going to be a good forum, the negative team then came up and said, "No, but it is a good forum because people can express their perspectives." And we think absolutely people can express their perspectives, but if you are going to get up on Facebook and actively perpetuate hate towards a specific group, you do not deserve to be able to spread that perspective. But secondly, Even if you're a minority who just like wants to get out your anger, that's never going to be a way that creates legitimate discourse and enables like the betterment of yourself within society. So onto my substantive matter. I'm going to be talking about how our model is going to affect the calculus of individuals and how it's going to change discourse in general society. So we see that like other than terrorist groups, individuals can also make inflammatory comments. And there are probably two types of individuals who will make inflammatory comments. The first ones are people who like genuinely are full of hate and are like not very nice people. And the second are people who are like kind of doing it casually off the cuff without really thinking about it. So these people who like, firstly the people who are hate-fueled. So these are people who genuinely believe all Muslims are terrorists, like they genuinely believe in white supremacy. And so we think that like no comments that they make are going to be suitable to have on Facebook. We also think that like they're always harmful, these kind of comments, and we don't really care if we make these people a bit upset because they can't like say that they think white people are better than everyone else, because quite frankly, they don't deserve to. We think that how they're likely to respond is they'll probably be angry, but as they're like probably a keyboard warrior, they're probably going to turn this anger towards Facebook. It's also likely that the negative team is going to come up here and tell us how like by suppressing their voices, they're going to be like more likely to be radicalized, and this is going to be really bad. But I'm just going to preemptively respond to that. So let's look at the things that lead to radicalization. Anger against like the government or some kind of like big organization who you can actively fight against. Secondly, contact with the terrorist organization. And thirdly, social isolation. So we think social isolation probably isn't really affected by this. Because the government isn't implementing these changes, Facebook is. If we don't really care if they're angry at Facebook because they can like write some comments to Facebook about how they're like not happy about this, but they're probably not going to lead to any material harm. And so we're quite okay with this. And as to contact with a terrorist organisation, we can actually see that our model minimises this because they're no longer seeing terrorist propaganda. They're no longer able to go and like look at why ISIS is really cool on the ISIS Facebook page. And so this actually lessens their ability to be radicalised. So we think that what's most likely to happen with these people is that they might move to another forum, or but probably like not many of them would do that, and overall the amount of hate would still decrease, and so that's fine. Onto our casual people. So they're probably people who like they might have just watched a video about ISIS, and so they're like, oh, this is really awful, it's really resonated with me, I'm gonna make a comment about how I hate Muslims because I really want to stop terrorism. Like not thinking about how this actually applies to all Muslims, because not all Muslims are terrorists. So when they are stopped by the filter and given the notification, they probably think, hey, I should probably reconsider my perspective, and thus it's going to promote positive discourse, and therefore we are proud to propose.
Now, the second negative speaker, Sophie, will continue their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mechanism of the opposition team never matched their desired outcome. They admitted to you that this model would cripple Facebook. What does this mean? This means that minorities who they tried so hard to defend would never have the voice that they needed to fight against this hate speech. They would never have the voice to defend the hate speech that would still exist under the affirmative team's model, and that is where they have lost the debate today. I have 3 issues of rebuttal and then an issue of substantive. To the first issue, I'd like to quickly talk about terrorism first, because that was obviously something that the affirmative team wanted to focus on a lot. Down the bench, they wanted to tell you that the terrorist group shouldn't have this power on Facebook, and that terrorist recruitment would be under the guise of free speech, and it's really bad, and people should stop looking at the ISIS Facebook page. We would like to under our model, what we set up from first was that Facebook has to comply with the law of the particular country that it lived in. So this means that if Australia had banned all influence of ISIS, which means the ISIS Facebook page, or people taught terrorist propaganda in Australia online, this means that Facebook would have to comply and make the Facebook page not allowed in Australia, and already suppress and get rid of this terrorist propaganda in the country. This is good for a number of reasons, but the main one is that it puts the impetus back on the government to take an action in this extreme sport. It is not up to Facebook, which has created an open forum for everyone to share their voice. It's not up to them to suppress this. It's up to the government to take a stand and ban this stuff, which then Facebook would take on board. And we think that the affirmative team has completely denied that part of our setup down the bench, and so I'd just like to have pointed that out. Moving on. First issue, does Facebook have an imperative to act? So is it a bad forum? The first affirmative and down the bench, they wanted to tell you that Facebook is full of uninformed people, and current moderation doesn't work, and the accountability on televised media is better, so it should be there more, and that essays aren't going to be read. So a couple of responses to this. Firstly, as I said in my introduction, they acknowledge that this cripples Facebook, and this is where they lose the debate, because the people that they wanted to stand behind, the minorities who they wanted to defend, they didn't have a voice on this. Furthermore, they asserted that these racist people who have these views would automatically change their views once this has happened. The second speaker of the affirmative team asserted this without giving any proof. What we see instead was, in the implementation of this model, they said that there would people be, or they said that I would say that they would all get more radicalised, and that would all happen. But instead, what we have is a lot of anger, and this anger would not create radicalised people, would just create more people, create people going onto Twitter and having less eloquent, just more racist things all on there without the right of reply that Facebook gives you. What Facebook also has is it has a name to a face. The problem that we have with Twitter in today's society is that it is an anonymous thing. You can make a word like live, love, laugh, and then post about the fact that you hate women. It's never a name to a face, which is what Facebook gives you, and that's why it's an important forum. They also wanted to tell you that, as I said, that televised media is better because Sonia Kruger had to retract her statement. The problem with media is influenced heavily by money and sensationalism. And it was never a forum where everyone was allowed to express their views, and everyone could, from a range of different groups, could express their views. And it was never going to be a forum that would actually solve the problem that we were trying to achieve in today's debate. What did we tell you? We told you that Facebook is a very open forum. We told you that it allows people to challenge their opinions, that minorities get to have a voice, and they're actively challenged within this forum. It's easier to monitor, and there are a broader spectrum of ideas for people to be able to do this, and it's not anonymous, and this is why the Facebook forum is actually a really good forum. At the end of this issue, Facebook is a forum that is necessary in order to try and combat the hate speech that we see in today's society, because without the discussion that's necessary, taking that away means actually enlarging the problem rather than dealing with it at its core, and that's the problem in today's debate. To the second issue, which is the effects on discourse and how that plays out. The first affirmative wanted to tell you that the discourse on Facebook is all negative all the time. It's often irrational, and there's no accountability, so people won't condemn their friends, and
and that there's no power to the minorities because there's a harm to them for reading this material online. A couple of responses to this. Firstly, the minorities have a right to reply, as I told you earlier, which is something that isn't accessible on many other media platforms. The fact that they're able to reply to a particular comment or a particular post is able to fight their issues. A second point onto this is that Facebook is an opt-in social media site. If minorities feel that they are not able to talk about their things or actually have a good discussion with these people online, they're easily able to close the window and then not go back online, or block the person who's posting these comments, or unfollow the page that is posting these. It was not necessary to have this extreme measure when we wanted to encourage the minority speaking out in this way. And the affirmative team was never able to blatantly tell you that all discourse was bad, because they then wanted to go on and talk about the fact that their model wouldn't actually, they would ban phrases being like, I hate white people, but would not ban phrases that more eloquently described the same thing. So this is bad for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they would only ban the team if it's blatant and uneloquent. So people would be allowed to really eloquently say, I hate white people. This restricts people who are, so the affirmative team is supporting people who are eloquently able to express their views, even if it's just as hateful as someone who says, I hate white people. This means that this restricts the freedom of just a single part of people, sometimes people who are uneducated or less educated, who are not able to have the same freedom as someone who's at a university degree. This is inherently flawed in so many ways that you can't just restrict a certain group of people from saying something just because they can say it better than someone else. It's a moral flaw in the opposition's case today. So they couldn't tell you that all discourse is bad, because they then implied that discourse under this eloquent status would still be okay, because then people would have essays, and even though they said they wouldn't read the essays, they would obviously have some sort of discourse for them to read the essays, which is a contention in their case. They then wanted to tell you that we would come out and say that there were, people would be more radicalised and all the discourse would just change into people wanting to join ISIS. The banned discourse means that we told you at first that people would go to other forms. People would go to Twitter, people would go to Tumblr, which they wanted to implement later, but that would just create the flow onto things like Reddit or other social media. People would always find a way around. So then the Twitter things would have 130 characters to say as much uneloquent and expletive thoughts that they wanted, and there would be. And the other problem with this would there would be more people talking about these issues in a positive light for the issues. So if Facebook has banned a particular post or banned a particular page, this page can go to another forum and be like, look, Facebook stopped our right to speech. Everybody, let's fight Facebook together, but in a group which is creating more people to follow on with them, which is obviously bad, and we wouldn't want that in today's society. We told you about the positive discourse that happens now, and we think that I've always obviously rebutted all the things that the affirmative team said, so the discourse is better under the status quo. So, quickly onto my substantive, why the affirmative team model encourages developing and transitioning democracies. So the importance of social media is in trying to create democracy is big. It has a lot of connections. These countries will ban Facebook because they'll see it as a left-wing threat, and it will be inherently bad because democracy is seen as less credible, and it's even progressive platform to use censorship, and they'll be hypocritical for Facebook to campaign to end censorship overseas. If censorship prevents democracy from gaining credibility, that is reason enough to oppose it, and therefore we are proud to oppose in today's debate.
The third affirmative speaker, Maddy, will conclude their case.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opposition today believes that minority groups within our system will lose their voices because all minority groups are extremists who don't know how to express themselves and their legitimate concerns about systemic oppression without inciting violence or hatred against the hegemonic group, which will obviously create legitimate discourse and remove all their problems. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate is about three main issues. Firstly, the idea of the way Facebook operates in creating rational discourse with particular consideration of minority groups. Secondly, the way individuals will respond in their perceptions of Facebook and their movement to alternative media forums. And thirdly, an idea about terrorist groups and how they'll be affected under this model. So to this first idea of the way Facebook operates, the opposition have given us a lot of material about how the primary harm of our change is the denial of voices for minority groups. There are a couple of problems with this. Firstly, we need to differentiate between what exactly our model is targeting versus what legitimate discourse that minority groups, like rejecting their oppressors, might look like. An individual who says, I feel systemically oppressed by the structural barriers, which means that I'm less likely to be employed than an equivalent person with a criminal record of a white race, is that is not hate speech. An individual who says, I hate all white people because I hate all white people within the system today, and I think that we should hurt them because they're the hegemonic dominating us. That is hate speech, and that is the kind of thing which will be not allowed within our model. The difference is, firstly, that one of them is inciting hate and violence, and the second thing is that one of them incites legitimate, rational discourse, and the other one can only ever incite more hateful and less legitimate discourse. We think that a minority that is responding to a comment that is I hate all of the minority groups, does have the right to make legitimate claims to saying, I don't think you should hate me. But we think when they say, I hate you back, all this is ever going to do is reaffirm the original commentator's view that minorities are less good and more minorities and should be hated and should be incited upon violence. We think that legitimate discourse occurs when people have rational discussions on non-social media forums where individuals can use capital letters to express themselves in a grammatically correct and articulate manner, expressing the structural barriers which exist within their society. And we think that no minority voice is going to be diminished unless that minority voice is in itself an extremist voice inciting violence or hatred against the hegemony. And if anything, we think that by the removal and the decreasing capacity of commentators to make extremist comments, minority voices will proportionately increase within the capacity of Facebook. Legitimate minority discourse, calling out structural barriers, will only be more represented because of the decreased capacity of illegitimate and racist discourse. And proportionally, minorities will have more of a voice within social media forums, within Facebook, through this change. And this will only ever be good for minorities, firstly, by removing them from exposure to the initial provocative statement, which demonized them, denigrated them, and created discourse which hated them directly based upon a physical, religious, or cultural feature. And secondly, because their capacity to have discourse has now been maximized to the extent that the only discourse that they can be exposed to is legitimate rather than hateful and denigrating. In fact, the second idea of this is the way that Facebook operates in terms of discourse fundamentally, whether it's rational and whether it's not. Now, our first affirmative came up with quite strong material which the negative team never responded to about the way Facebook operates and the way people write on Facebook. Facebook isn't known as an academic site. It's a social media site in which people express opinions, make jokes, and post photos of their new Pokemon Go. It's not a place in which many people promote essays considering structural barriers within their system. Instead, it's a forum by which individuals who are friends and family discuss and share silly, trivial things, or indeed inflammatory, offensive, and profanity-strewn comments. We think that discourse on Facebook will always be less rational than mass media forums regardless of the sensationalism, we think that terrorism and extremism is like fundamentally sensational enough that like newspapers are going to sell articles without calling all Muslims terrorists. We think that at least public media forums have checks and balances in place. They have experts, they have official like images, they have like general data, they have to cite their sources, they can be held accountable for misrepresenting information. However, on Facebook, none of these things apply. Individuals are not accountable for anything that they say, and in fact, they are more likely to be liked by their friends and family the more offensive and profanities-strewn the comments they make are. We think that this makes Facebook an irrational forum of discussion because, firstly, even the rational discourse which exists is less likely to be read and less likely to be consumed. Secondly, because individuals who make inflammatory comments are likely to be supported by the friends and families who see the information on their newsfeed. And thirdly, because regardless of the rational discourse, it's totally mitigated by the harm initially given to a minority individual. So for that reason, we think that Facebook will always be harmful to minority individuals within the status quo unless changed, because it is an irrational forum in which minority individuals are oppressed and harmed. On to the second idea of the way that individuals respond or will respond to the change. The opposition have told us a couple of things. They told us that individuals will be angry about the change, that will resent the change itself. They've told us that they will look for alternative forums by which to express their anger. So our first thing to say is that we are glad that these racist individuals are angry at something other than the people that they are being racist to. We think that any misdirection of that anger away from an oppressed group will probably be good for that oppressed group, particularly because it means that at least they'll spend some of their time being less offensive towards an oppressed group and more offensive towards like a huge company which they can do nothing harmful to. So we think that that's always going to be a good thing if even a little bit of discourse is directed away from the minority. The second thing we'd like to say is that most people brave enough to write inflammatory anger, like anger-provoked comments on Facebook, aren't the type of people to like rationally be like, how can I most effectively get back at Facebook? I know I'll like initiate a couple of other social media accounts by which I'll say the exact same things in 140 characters or less. We think that the types of people that are going to go to alternative media forums are far less and more likely they're going to go talk to their equally offensive friends about how ridiculous Facebook is in denying them their freedom of speech. And finally, we think that these people in the status quo already have access to these alternative media forums, and the only thing that our change is doing is restricting the capacity of their access to multiple public forums, decreasing the amount of hate speech that they can have, which, if it is harmful on Twitter in the status quo, is equally harmful on Twitter and Facebook without our change. And if, all we've done is decrease the outreach of their comments, decrease the number of social media forums, and decrease the character count. It's far less difficult to be offensive in 140 characters or less on Twitter than it is on Facebook. So I think for that reason, individuals may be more angry, and that's okay because it's better for the minority and it's better for the oppressed groups. So on to this third and final idea, which arose a little bit in the halfway through this debate about terrorist groups and the way that this may or may not affect them. The opposition told us that the way that our security operations govern have been able to prevent terrorist attacks within Australia is because of Facebook. So firstly, we principally disagree with the idea that ISIS posts extremist comments being like, I hate Sydney-siders and on the 21st of June I'm going to commit a terrorist attack, come meet me there. Not the kinds of extremist comments, and we don't think that's the way that individuals and the government organisations track terrorists. Instead, they look at their location services, they look at their private messages, they pose as individuals who like these organisations and privately message the heads of these organisations and try and find all these avenues still exist, and they're incapable of tracking terrorists without Facebook offensive comments. We think that's fundamentally unfair, and we think in the long term the fact that overall, there'll be less public exposure to terrorist comments. There will be less terrorism and therefore less terrorist attacks in the long term. So either way, there'll be less benefits to terrorist groups and more security in Australia. So for these three reasons, the fact that Facebook will always be less rational and more harmful without our change, that individuals will not be harmful to minorities and that terrorist groups will not be benefited, we are proud to propose.
The third negative speaker, Eden, will conclude their case.
Claimed that no one reads long-form comments or long-form posts, their decision to condemn minorities to not being heard by saying they couldn't have one catchy Facebook post that says, "I hate white people," but condemning them to having long-form posts that explain with multiple reasons why systemic oppression has hurt them was horrific. Because what it meant was the application of free speech on their side had no justification. The justification that we gave you was the only one that stood. Their justification was whether or not they could arbitrarily decide whether or not minorities were being constructive enough or were good enough at debating for their Facebook posts to merit attention. What did we tell you? 2 issues in this speech about why we should err on the side of caution in allowing free speech instead of silencing people. First, is free speech necessary? We gave you a clear metric at first about why we should always err on the side of caution with free speech and allow people to express their identity because it was incredibly important to them. They gave you only 3 questions to this metric. They gave you 3 different ways that they would limit free speech. They said, firstly, they would limit it when they had arbitrarily distinguished that these were not important views. Why exactly were these explicitly important views? It was because, firstly, the tone policing of their side was not a good enough reason to decide that something was not an important view. While it might not be constructive under their definition of it to say that you hate a certain group, it might be incredibly empowering or a way to find solidarity or a good way to meet other people from your movement. Those were all reasons that we gave you why it's incredibly important for people to be able to express their views. But then they gave you some reasons why it might be important. They told you that people are more likely to read it, that it's more likely to get attention. That was exactly the exact reason why it was important that we had views, even if they were expressed in a way that might be considered hate speech. The next thing they said is, well, minorities are better than that. They could just step it up and write long-form articles. What we told you was the exact people who had media teams, had whole groups of people writing their Facebook posts, who had people researching how to get around algorithms, were those that had the established networks, had the money, and they were the people who got around the metrics of their side. That's why it was clear that when they laughed at the end of this point, saying, well, if it hurts your identity, we don't care, boo-hoo for you, what that actually meant was 2 things. Either, in the worst case scenario, they were stopping people whose only platform was Facebook, or secondly, for those, if it was truly a racist person who they were stopping from saying something racist, the harassment that we told you that would happen on our side of the house got worse, because when you could do other things like spamming their accounts, like reporting them, like doxing them, that was way worse under their side of the house. That's why anger was constructive, and that's why these were important views. The next metric they told you was, well, maybe it's important views, but what if it's not well-expressed views, like how it's not a long academic article and how they would decrease the character count. Firstly, the mechanism that they gave you on their side never solved that problem. Their admission that they would condemn people to go on Twitter where they had less character count only said that as their model progressed, these would be more and more offensive views and less well expressed over time. That was an exact reason why their mechanism, as we told you down the bench, did not match their outcome. But it was also untrue from the outset that people could not express things succinctly. That was because the exact paternalistic rhetoric from their side that said that people on Facebook are uneducated and therefore don't deserve to be heard. We were the only side that thought that just because you're uneducated, just because you couldn't express something in the way that you liked, was not a reason why you shouldn't. Then we gave you a number of reasons why this was the best system, because you pick what you see, so that those who click on a certain type of article are more likely to see. The reason we have to this way was because it don't work. That made us question exactly the efficacy of their system, a question that they forgot to respond to down the line. That was things like, if it was as nuanced as they said it would take similar or worse amounts of time in order for it to be effective. But also, that showed if their system was incredibly quick, that its application was random, and that your ability to say something freely and to express your identity should not be decided just on the basis of the luck of the zeros and ones of their algorithm. That's why at the end of this point, what's clear is that our mechanism of free speech was way more important, because it wasn't on unjust terms like whether or not you accidentally stumbled upon a keyword or got into a phrase that shouldn't have been allowed into that algorithm, but it was about whether or not you were condemned by your peers and whether or not you were liked or angered or wowed by your peers on Facebook. That's why, just based on the question of free speech, we've won this debate. But secondly, how does this impact discourse? They gave you a couple of things. The first was to say that the media was more accountable than Facebook was, and that minorities would be better off if they just stuck to TV. A couple of things. While it was Facebook that called out Sonia Kruger after she said incredibly racist comments, she said them because she was allowed on TV. Why? It's because TV is way more likely to be sensationalist. It's owned by people with a lot of money, and that's what we told you from first, that it's inaccessible to minorities. So if it was true what we told you down the line, which is that this cripples Facebook, this stops it from being a forum of discussion, and this moves back to mainstream discussion, that is a step backwards for minorities, because those mainstream forms of discussion have consistently failed those who need discussion the most. Why? We think for a couple of reasons. We think, firstly, it's way more difficult to call people out. We told you why on Facebook from first speaker. You can call people out instantly on Facebook. You can instantly get around that post. The second thing we told you is you can opt out. Mouli gave you 5 different ways that you can change your Facebook feed and opt out of Facebook, that they responded to none of them, whereas you cannot opt out of the mainstream media and the way that that operates. The next thing we told you is that the idea that reputation of mainstream media and accountability would be a check for that was ridiculous. It was the money and the incentives to have a sensational story that meant that people were more likely to give airtime to racists on TV. The last thing here was that if it was true that their algorithm would not be as effective as we told you, that had so many harms. That meant that if something did slip through the cracks and was allowed on Facebook, it was automatically got a sense of legitimacy, that if it slipped through the cracks, people saw it and thought, well, it couldn't be racist, it's on Facebook. The next reason they told you is, well, then maybe it has less impact because minorities are less likely to see it if it's on other forums. Not only did I tell you already why it's untrue that minorities are less likely to see it if it's on Channel 7, but also that even if it was true that that was the case, it is way more harmful because it should be in a forum that it can be called out. That's why it's clear here that you don't get to impact discourse positively on their side of the house, because you have discourse operate in a sphere that has systematically locked out those who need to have a voice. The last thing they said is, well, it will stop casual racists from being super racist, because they'll get the notification that's like, you can't make your status anymore, and they'll think, oh, golly, maybe I shouldn't have said that in the first place. This was just an assertion from their side of the house, and we actually gave you multiple reasons from the beginning why it was more likely to be the opposite. We told you, firstly, it strengthened the narrative extremists and racists use to recruit more people. That was things like saying that culture was too PC, saying that people were unfairly underprivileging them, and saying things like, actually, women are the ones that are oppressing men, something that they would allow for you to post on Facebook. Second, we told you that these people care a lot about free speech. That's specifically people who are in politics, who are working on a platform of the Constitution, or those who are on media websites, who operate on the condition that they're allowed to publish something. That's why it's way more likely that they have a better platform under their side of the house. At the end of this, it was clear that those who truly needed a voice were harmed under their side of the house, while those who needed to be silenced could not. That's why we won this debate.
The adjudication panel will now retire to consider their verdict.
a little bit insulting.
So, like, if I was talking at quite a loud pace like this is quite a decent volume and most people can hear. Yeah.
That's insane.
It goes, and the mic's there and the things are there.
Yeah, that is hard.
I love the glasses, by the way, but they also
Okay, so... Whoa!
except mine, I can't see far away.
Yeah, but because they have this thing like converging people at the time.
loudly and stuff, and then laugh at your jokes. Yeah, those guys, I don't know what else to say. I want to go fucking dark. Quite literally what I did to you guys when I was seeing about that one. I was just like, so when they came out and told me this, they've proven their stupidity, and you guys were like, aww. And the first thing you did was just like reflect on yourself for that 15 seconds. Whilst I got a whole bunch of material out, and I was like, oh, fuck this. Like, I don't, like, so it's just a tactic. It was literally just a thing. I don't know what to do. Right? No, I don't know to be witty and funny. Like, you were. You're assassin. You said you were. Like, just like, oh, this is hateful. What the heck has he done? So, because it was well, getting this consistent I'm like, this is close when I can actually buy it. And you're just like, yeah, I have the Sophie Jaggar. It's like, what's that? Right, so, regardless of what trophy. Okay, everybody, back to stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. A member of the adjudicating panel, Eleanor Gordon-Smith, will now deliver the adjudication and announce the result of this debate.
Well, hi everyone. What a joy to have been able to see such wonderful speakers on such an outstanding debate on this otherwise fairly miserable day. This was a real treat for us. We're kind of old, seasoned debaters at this point, so it's really nice for us to get to see sort of young talent at this calibre and this degree of excellence. So if we could just join in one more round of applause for all the speakers. So for those of you who are maybe a bit new to debating, or this is the first time that you've seen a spectacle like this, there are two sorts of decisions in debating. The first is a unanimous decision, and the second is a split decision. The difference is the clues in the title. It depends how many adjudicators were in agreement about the result. Now in this debate, what has happened is we've had a split decision, which means that two of the adjudicators agreed on the result, and one thought a lot of your critical thinking skills. So I won't mince any more words, we'll get right round to the adjudication. We were all the calibre of this debate, and we thought that each speaker did a really good job of engaging with some important kind of philosophical wasn't, and that most importantly those people couldn't access other media that would otherwise let them access their opinions. So we thought that on it here was that extremists are likely to go to other forums, to places where their opinions won't have access to a right, won't be mediated by public gaze and discussion, and there won't be opportunities for minorities to in offline settings, even worse. So we heard that this was a sort of move that was going to persecute the people who already feel pretty badly about the government around them, and it was going to make them think that PC culture had taken over and that them and people like them were just being marginalised even further by the forces that be and women somehow in a conspiracy of Jews and that sort of thing. We thought that that was pretty strong material. We thought, however, that the affirmative was probably correct in saying that these sorts of like rage-enhancing tools might not have the kind of actual practical outcome that the negative was talking about, and then in terms of law enforcement, that catching these sorts of comments at the front before they were kind of published and visible to other people still gave law enforcement the tools to be able to correct those people and get onto them, kind of stop terrorist attacks in the nuts. However, we thought that some of the material from the negative, particularly later on in the debate, about legitimising narratives of persecution and giving these people a battle cry about being silenced by PC culture, was a really important psychological point that the affirmative wasn't able to respond to. So for those three reasons, we've given this debate today to the negative team from Sydney Girls. Please join me again in congratulating all speakers.
A team member from Northern Beaches Secondary at Manly will now congratulate the winners.
I'd just like to say thanks for coming along to a very high-class debate. You guys have been great competition over the years, and we wish you all the best in the HSC and in future debates.
Member of the winning team, Sydney Girls, will now respond.
So firstly, I'd like to thank everyone who's come to support us, not only in this debate, but all the debates leading up to this. Your support has been immense, and I'm so grateful for that. We're all so grateful for that. Thank you to the timekeeper, adjudicators, anyone who organised this debate and made it run so smoothly. Thank you so much. Your help is muchly appreciated. That's not very good English. Last but definitely not least, thank you so much to Manly. You are a great team, and we wish you the best of luck in any of your future debates and, of course, in the HSC.
It's my pleasure now to call upon Rosemary Davis, the Arts, Sports and Initiatives Director within the New South Wales Department of Education, to hand out certificates and medallions to the winners and runners-up.
Okay, so to the runners-up, Elesi. Taylor. Maddy. And Tom. And there is a coach medallion. Who would like to get? Looks like James Smith's coming forward to get this. Right. All right, and now our winning team. Please come forward, Mouli. Sophie. Eden. Bronwyn. And I believe this goes to Justin. Is he still with us? Oh, right at the back.